Hello, everyone. I have experienced bad product workshops, both hosted by my own and by someone else. While working on this presentation, I started wondering what are the experience of other product managers in Allegro. So I conducted a short survey and I asked on our Slack channel one question. Have you ever experienced have you ever participated in a poor product workshop, no matter yours or someone else? And I explained that by poor, I mean badly facilitated, unprepared, without an agenda or plan, without a goal, or with the goal but not achieved. I got 57 responses. Thank you for that. And results are quite disturbing. Almost 90% of Allegro product managers, of respondents, have experienced bad product workshops. But the good news is that I want to provide you with practical tips based on my experience how to mitigate or at least minimize the risk of preparing bad product workshop. And even if something went wrong, how get value out of it. Before I give you my tips, I will ask you one question, and you should ask this question to yourself as well. Do you really need a workshop? Are you sure? Sometimes simple meeting is good enough. If you are to start a project and need to make people on the same page, just host a kickoff meeting. If you want to share a piece of information and need to gather feedback or review, just offline collaboration will do. Sometimes you actually do need workshop, but your stakeholders, participants, are not ready because they have to prepare something beforehand or they need some data first. Okay, if you are sure you need workshop, I offer you a few tips how to organize them. I was once struggling to choose MVP, minimum viable product. So I prepared and ran story mapping workshop. What story mapping is, you may ask? It is a technique that allows to map the customer journey in a linear form, and it consists of customer goals, activities, steps, and tasks. It's usually conducted collaboratively by putting post-it notes to some whiteboard. For example, it can look like this. It's a customer journey for selecting some product while buying online. Now, once you have the journey ready, you select what are the actions and steps that are the most important to your customer. In other words, what is the minimum viable product? For example, in this picture, you can see the blue line that indicates which tasks were selected to MVP. That's great technique, but there is a catch. The host and the participants should know the product domain and the customer well beforehand. Otherwise, you can't know what is important. When I conducted my first story mapping workshop, I didn't know product domain and the customer well enough. So I didn't achieve my goal. Was it a failure? Yes. Was it a good failure? Also yes, because I learned the process better, find blind spots when I needed to research more, and my team's common understanding of the process actually did increase. Knowing what I know now, I would have used a different framework, such as event storming, which maps the whole product domain, its constraints, all entry points, events, commands, and reaction to these commands. In general, it's much better for new products, especially in a new domain, And guess what? We even have professional facilitators of event storming in Allegro. You can ask them to facilitate your workshop. Just contact them on event storming Slack channel. My tip number 1, adjust framework to the goal. What outcome do you want to achieve? Is it a list of ideas or prioritize backlog? What is your product? What phase your product is in? There are different frameworks for the discovery phase and different for delivery phase. Okay, you know the goal. You have chosen your framework wisely. It's time to start preparations. But what to start them from? Maybe it's obvious for most of you, but I will say it anyway. Yes, it's time to prepare the agenda. If you use a structured framework such as story mapping or event storming, it's pretty straightforward. But how to calculate how much time you need for your workshop? Solution I use: for each point of agenda, try to estimate how much time it will take. Consider some breaks, especially in case of workshops longer than 2 hours. Consider the number of participants. If any part of the workshop require active participation, completing some tasks, and participants are not able to do them simultaneously, for example, in breakout sessions, multiple number of tasks by number of participants. Quite practical solution I use is a spreadsheet where I put agenda points and estimation of time needed in 2 scenarios, optimistic and pessimistic. It can look like this. Let's take the first row, discussing the goal of the workshop. It's usually enough to discuss the goal for a few minutes. For this given workshop, I estimated it would take from 2 to 15 minutes. By the way, these estimations almost never end in optimistic time frame. You may be wondering, okay, what if go beyond pessimistic estimation? It happens sometimes, especially when digressions start to dominate the workshop. One way to avoid this is to prepare a parking space for all the topics that are important, but not exactly in the scope. So, my tip number 2 is timing matters, and when thinking of time, consider agenda, breaks, number of participants, and avoid extending the time, for example, by using parking space. The parking is one of the things you can prepare ahead of time. Depending on the form of your workshop, online or offline, there are other things as well. Let's first focus on online workshop, as it's probably the most popular form in the era of remote and hybrid work. You will probably use some kind of online collaboration tool and whiteboard or Canva in software such as Mural, Miro, FigJam, or Jamboard. Before my first workshop in Allegro, I didn't have the access to Mural, and I was new in the organization, so I didn't know who to ask, what kind of request to report, and so on. The time of workshop was approaching inevitably, and my Mural wasn't ready. I started panicking and even tried out some open source tools, but luckily, a week before the date, I got the access and was able to prepare the Canva. To save you from this hurdle, here is the request you need to fill in to get access to FigJam in Allegro. I think it's also a good practice to prepare some insights and supporting data upfront. This way, participants have ready-to-use materials in generating ideas or in prioritization. But what if you have prepared the tool and the materials, you are starting the workshop, and people report they don't have the access to the tool? That can ruin your confidence and put you, again, in panic mode, which is better to avoid. Therefore, check the permissions with the participants before the workshop. You can hide the content using simple shapes and blocking them like this. This is the Fig Jam. You can just click in the Section button, select elements you want to group as section, and then click Hide button in Sections toolbar. That way, you won't spoil the workshop for the users. Another very simple yet practical thing is to plan ahead how would you like to divide participants in breakout rooms, if you use them, of course. Again, simple spreadsheet with rooms and participants' name will do and will save you a few minutes during the workshop. And what about the old good offline workshop? Well, I think you can find countless tips and tricks how to prepare them well in the internet. I will just share one experience with event storming workshop my friend was running. The workshop were to take place in the office. We had some sticky notes, markers, and even snacks prepared. But what I wouldn't have come up with, and luckily my friend did, was to prepare long reel of paper. That way, we had bigger workspace, we were not limited to the whiteboard, and we could freely draw on it, which proved to be very useful. As you can probably guess, my tip number 3 is be prepared. Depending on workshop form, online or offline, consider the tool, materials, permissions, breakout rooms, sticky notes, and other things like that, booking a room, and finally, snacks and water. If you need to think of snacks and water, that means your workshop are going to be pretty long. Maybe they will be too long. The longer the workshop, the more varied the format needs to be. Long, unstructured discussions framed as workshop should be prohibited by company policy, if you ask me. And some comments to my survey mentioned in the beginning prove the lack of structure is a real problem. In psychology, it's been the subject of different studies proving that individuals have tendency to perceive the world as structured rather than unstructured. People like structured things because they reduce the randomness and ambiguity of the world. They provide the belief that the social and natural environment is predictable. They compensate for reduced personal control and help people cope with psychological threats. Some of you may argue and say, what about brainstorming session? How to make them structured if they are unstructured in their nature? Well, even brainstorming can have some structure. You can divide participants into teams, assign some specific part of the problem to solve for each team, then encourage teams to exchange ideas and organize voting session. Tip number 4, keep it structured by following agenda, facilitating according to the framework, and making use of such tools as breakout rooms, voting session, and Canvas. Surgeon and researcher Atul Gawande explains in the checklist manifesto that doing introductions before surgery reduces complications by making it more likely that someone speaks up if there's a problem. What does it to do with product workshop? I think it also applies. Get everyone to speak early on to foster more participation throughout the workshop. Ideally, have each participant voice their name. A good idea is some kind of warm-up activity at the beginning. For example, ask participants to share 2 things about themselves that are true and 1 that is not, and ask others to vote which is false. I have participated in a workshop where this activity was used, and it went very well. Plus, some people use it to refer to the subject of workshop, which from the beginning tunneled the discussion toward the right direction. On the other hand, this kind of activity might seem a little bit silly for some people, especially if they are senior managers and value their time a lot. So use it wisely. Can you imagine Roy taking part in such activity? From my experience, the best way to engage participants is to assign them tasks individually or in groups. As I mentioned earlier, You can even think of these groups earlier, before the workshop, so you don't have to waste time during the workshop. What kind of task, you may ask? If you use, for example, story mapping, ask participants to add goals or activities or steps by themselves. After that, you can compare the results, eliminate duplicates, and discuss what MVP should be. And it goes the same with any other techniques that is structured and requires some steps. In short, engage participants from the beginning by warm-up activity, assigning tasks, breakout rooms, and votings. And that is my tip number 5. Have you ever been in a meeting and wonder, what am I doing here? And I have nothing to say regarding the topic and have tons of more important stuff to do right now. I think we all have. Inviting the right people is even more important in case of workshops that are usually pretty long, can take a whole day, and they are quite engaging. At least they should be. On the other hand, without essential people, you will probably not be able to achieve the goal of the workshop, just like in case of workshop I hosted once. I invited people from 2 departments, both crucial for the success of the project. They both confirmed they will join. At least they said they confirm. I didn't check confirmation in Google Calendar, and it turned out that the second department just ditched me. No one came. What did I do? I just kept running the workshop, but without the input of the second group, it was just pointless, and I got pretty brutal feedback from the group number 1. And honestly, I deserved it. What I should have done was just to stop the workshop after gathering input from the first group and schedule separate workshop for the second group. So this is my tip number 6. Limit participants to only essential people. Don't invite people that don't have any input, but remember about stakeholders like customer support specialists, sales people, or operations, especially if you are from DEX like me. Okay, let's sum up. So far, I gave you 6 tips how to organize good product workshop. Adjust the framework to the goal. Timing matters. Be prepared. Keep it structured. Engage attendees and limit participants. But I promised 7. My final tip is do something with the results, or in other words, follow up. None of the 6 tips mentioned before matters if, after the workshop, you don't make use of its output. You prepared and ran great story mapping session and defined the MVP. That's great. But now your dev team has to have it in more operationally useful form than sticky notes. You forge a compelling and catchy product vision. Superb. But make it visible and shared among all the stakeholders. If you thank people for their participation and send them short summary, they will be more likely to accept your invitation to next product workshop. So do that as well. Last but not least, ask them for feedback and improve accordingly. Okay, at the beginning of my presentation, I promised you 7 tips how to organize a good product workshop and also some tips what to do if something goes wrong. I hope I delivered, and here they are once again. Number 1, adjust the framework to the goal, and if the goal is not achieved, at least learn as much as you can. Timing matters. Use parking, for example, if digression happens. Be prepared, but also remember that you can't prepare for everything. always something unexpected can happen. Keep it structured. Engage participants. Limit participants. If essential people don't show up, don't do my mistake, and don't be afraid to adapt or even reschedule. And finally, follow up. I hope you found these tips useful. Thank you, and feel free to ask any question.